Крым – это наше общее достояние и важнейший фактор стабильности в регионе. И эта стратегическая территория должна находиться под сильным, устойчивым суверенитетом, который по факту может быть только российским сегодня.
Welcome to RoboCast on the Daniel David Allen YouTube channel.
We're your AI hosts.
Right here to explore curiosities and intriguing topics.
That tickle the brain.
We break down complex subjects.
Unearthing the insights you really need.
Think of it like a knowledge shortcut.
Yeah.
Today we are exploring the 2014 annexation of Crimea.
All right.
Well, here's a mystery for you.
Okay.
Did this event directly lead to Russia's meddling in the 2016 U.S. elections? We'll unravel that by the end of this episode, but first, let's set the stage.
That's good.
Crimea and Russia have a long history.
Indeed, their relationship goes back centuries in the 18th century. Catherine the Great incorporated Crimea into the Russian Empire.
Oh, wow.
Its strategic location, specifically access to the Black Sea,
Right.
made it quite valuable.
So valuable, it seems, that even after the fall of the empire, Russia's interest in the peninsula never really faded.
You could say that.
But fast forward to the 20th century,
Okay.
and things take a darker turn. What happened under Stalin?
Under Stalin's rule, the Crimean Tatars, the peninsula's indigenous Muslim population,
Right.
were tragically deported en masse.
Deporting an entire population, there had to be some justification, however skewed.
Right. Stalin accused them of collaborating with the Nazis during World War II,
Oh, wow.
a brutal and unjust act that wasn't acknowledged until much later.
So when did the Crimean Tatars finally get to return home?
It took decades. It wasn't until Gorbachev's era,
Okay.
during the late 1980s, that they were allowed to come back to Crimea. The Supreme Soviet finally recognized the deportation as illegal.
So the Tatars return, but at this point, Crimea is still part of the Soviet Union.
Right.
What happened when the USSR dissolved?
Right. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapses and Crimea becomes part of newly independent Ukraine. Yet this didn't erase the historical ties with Russia, and tensions, particularly surrounding the Black Sea Fleet, continued to simmer.
I can imagine having a powerful neighbor's fleet right there would be cause for concern. Where was the fleet based?
Russia's Black Sea Fleet was based in Sevastopol, Crimea. The issue of control over the fleet and its facilities remained a point of friction between the two nations.
So a delicate balancing act. Was there anything that significantly destabilized the situation?
The Euromaidan protests in Kyiv, which started in late 2013, were a major turning point.
Right.
These protests were sparked by then-President Viktor Yanukovych's decision to abandon a trade agreement with the European Union in favor of closer ties with Russia.
These protests sound pivotal. What was their connection to Crimea?
Yanukovych had a significant base of support in Crimea, especially among the Russian-speaking population.
Right.
They viewed the protests in Kyiv with suspicion and saw his eventual ousting as a direct threat.
So this political upheaval in Kyiv created an opportunity for Russia to make its moves on Crimea.
It certainly opened a window in February 2014. Unmarked Russian troops, often called Little Green Men, appeared in Crimea.
Little green men. I've heard that term, but never really understood it.
Right?
Can you elaborate?
These were heavily armed soldiers, but their uniforms bore no identifying insignia. Their appearance, coupled with the swift takeover of key government buildings and military bases, fueled a great deal of confusion and speculation.
It sounds like a scene from a spy thriller. Was there any pushback from Ukraine?
There were some tense standoffs, but ultimately the Ukrainian forces were simply outnumbered and outmaneuvered.
Wow.
The Little Green Men were highly effective in their operation.
So the annexation was rapid and decisive. What about the people of Crimea? Did they have any say in this?
That's a crucial question, one that lies at the heart of the controversy surrounding the annexation.
Okay.
Shortly after Russian troops took control, a referendum was held in Crimea on whether to join Russia.
A referendum that sounds like a democratic process. What was the outcome?
The official results showed overwhelming support for joining Russia. However, the legitimacy of the referendum was widely contested by the international community.
What were the specific concerns surrounding the referendum?
There were serious concerns about voter intimidation.
Yeah.
The presence of Russian troops and a distinct lack of international observers. Many viewed it as an attempt to legitimize an already orchestrated takeover.
So despite the referendum, the world didn't exactly welcome the annexation of Crimea.
Yeah.
What was the global response?
The international community largely condemning the annexation as a violation of Ukraine's sovereignty and international law imposed sanctions on Russia.
What kind of impact did these sanctions have?
These sanctions targeted key sectors of the Russian economy, particularly the financial and energy sectors,
Right.
and were intended to pressure the Russian government to change course.
Okay, Russia annexes Crimea. The world reacts with condemnation and sanctions. Where did that leave the people of Crimea?
That is a complex question with no simple answers. Some Crimeans, especially the Russian-speaking population, welcomed the annexation as a return to their historical homeland.
That sentiment makes sense considering the historical context.
However, for others, particularly the Crimean Tatars and those who identify as Ukrainian, the annexation was a traumatic event. They felt their homeland had been taken from them, and many faced discrimination and persecution under the new Russian authorities.
So the annexation created a deeply divided society in Crimea.
It did. The annexation has had a profound impact on the lives of all Crimeans, regardless of their political views. It turned the peninsula into a flashpoint in the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine, with repercussions felt far beyond the region.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
Historical ties between Russia and Crimea, the Euromaidan protests, the appearance of the Little Green Men, the controversial referendum, and the global condemnation. But let's circle back to that mystery we posed at the beginning.
Okay.
Did the annexation of Crimea directly lead to Russia's interference in U.S. elections?
The answer isn't a simple yes or no. While the annexation itself didn't directly cause the interference, it did set off a chain of events that ultimately contributed to it. The sanctions imposed on Russia played a significant role.
So the sanctions motivated Russia to meddle in the U.S. elections. Now, that's what I call intrigue. Let's break that down after a short break. Don't touch that dial.
All right.
We've seen an illegal referendum in Crimea, an illegitimate move by the Russians to annex Crimea, and dangerous risks of escalation. The United States is today moving, as we said we would, to impose additional costs on Russia. Based on the executive order that I signed in response to Russia's initial intervention in Ukraine, we're imposing sanctions on more senior officials of the Russian government. In addition, we are today sanctioning a number of other individuals with substantial resources and influence who provide material support to the Russian leadership, as well as a bank that provides material support to these individuals.
Those sanctions hit the Russian economy hard. Putin viewed them as an act of aggression by the West, believing the U.S. was trying to weaken Russia and undermine his leadership.
So he felt backed into a corner.
In a way, yes. That perceived threat, coupled with Putin's desire to retaliate and disrupt the international order, led him to authorize a campaign to interfere in the U.S. elections.
Talk about a ripple effect. The annexation of Crimea set the stage for Russia's interference by fueling Putin's motivations.
Right.
It's fascinating how these events connect.
It's a complex web of interconnected events highlighting the intricate nature of geopolitics. But let's zoom back in on Crimea. What were the immediate consequences of the annexation for the people and the economy?
Yeah, you mentioned a divided society. What about the economic realities? Did everyday life change drastically for Crimeans?
Initially, there was a short-lived economic boost. Salaries, particularly for government workers, went up. However, this was quickly offset by rising prices, a direct result of the ruble's depreciation.
A temporary sugar rush followed by a crash.
Exactly. Once Russian authority was firmly established, wages were cut back, sometimes drastically. We're talking reductions of 30% to 70%.
That's a significant blow. Did any specific industry suffer?
Tourism, which had been Crimea's main industry, took a nosedive, plummeting by 50% in the year following the annexation. Political instability and international condemnation deterred many potential visitors.
A ghost town scenario for a place once known for its vibrant tourism.
And it wasn't just tourism. Agriculture was hit hard, too, when Ukraine cut off the water supply through the North Crimean Canal.
Wait, they cut off the water supply? Why would they do that?
That canal supplied 85% of Crimea's fresh water.
Wow.
Cutting it off was a major strategic move by Ukraine, and it had a devastating impact on Crimean agriculture.
It sounds like integrating Crimea into the Russian economy turned out to be much more complicated and costly than initially anticipated.
You could say that Russia has had to invest heavily in alternative water sources like desalination plants, but meeting the demand has been an ongoing challenge. The economic consequences of the annexation have been significant and continue to this day.
Beyond the economic turmoil, you also mentioned human rights concerns following the annexation. Can you tell us more about that?
The UN and various NGOs have reported widespread human rights abuses in Crimea since it came under Russian control. These include reports of torture, arbitrary detentions, forced disappearances, and discrimination against particular groups, especially the Crimean Tatars.
targeting specific groups is never a good sign. What happened to the Crimean Tatars under Russian rule?
They faced renewed persecution, their organizations were banned, their leaders and journalists harassed and imprisoned, and their cultural and religious practices suppressed.
That's tragic, especially considering they had already endured so much hardship.
The annexation created a climate of fear and repression for those who didn't support it. Freedom of speech was restricted, independent media shut down, and critics of the Russian authorities faced intimidation and retaliation.
So the annexation came at a high cost, both economically and in terms of human rights. It seems like a classic case of a victor imposing its will on the vanquished.
The situation is far more nuanced than that. Remember, a significant portion of the Crimean population, particularly Russian speakers, welcomed the annexation.
Right, we talked about that earlier, but what about the information war that was waged alongside the military maneuvers? How did media and propaganda shape the narrative surrounding this event?
The information battlefield, both Russia and Ukraine, along with their allies, engaged in intense information warfare campaigns. It was a battle for hearts and minds, a struggle to control the narrative and influence public opinion.
So war of words alongside the war of tanks?
Mm-hmm.
What tactics were employed in this information war?
We saw it all: media manipulation, disinformation campaigns, the suppression of dissenting voices. It was a full-fledged propaganda war using every tool in the modern arsenal.
Can you give us some specific examples of how this played out in the media?
Russian state-controlled media portrayed the annexation as a liberation, a return of Crimea to its rightful place within Russia. They highlighted the alleged threats faced by Russian speakers in Crimea and emphasized the historical ties between the two.
Creating an image of a heroic rescue mission.
Precisely. Meanwhile, Ukrainian and Western media denounced the annexation as an illegal invasion, a violation of Ukraine's sovereignty. They emphasized the presence of Russian troops, the questionable legitimacy of the referendum, and the human rights abuses committed by the Russian authorities.
So two starkly contrasting narratives presented to the world.
Two sides of the same coin, each pushing its own version of events. The proliferation of social media intensified this information war, making it difficult for people to distinguish fact from fiction.
A confusing and chaotic information environment where truth becomes the first casualty. How did this impact the way people perceive the annexation?
The information war surrounding the annexation of Crimea was intense and sophisticated. It had a profound impact on how the events were perceived, both within the region and internationally. This highlights the power of narrative and the danger of propaganda in shaping public opinion.
A stark reminder of the importance of critical thinking and media literacy in the digital age. The manipulation of information and the spread of propaganda.
Yeah.
It's scary to think how easily perceptions can be swayed.
It is a sobering reminder of the need for critical thinking, media literacy, and seeking out diverse perspectives, especially in our digital age.
Absolutely. Now, shifting gears a bit.
Okay.
How has the annexation of Crimea shaped the broader geopolitical landscape?
Yeah.
What are the long-term implications?
The annexation of Crimea was a watershed moment. It marked a turning point in Russia's relations with the West, ushering in a new era of tension and mistrust.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine things going back to the way they were before.
It's highly unlikely.
Right.
The annexation fundamentally altered the balance of power in the region. It demonstrated Russia's willingness to use military force to achieve its objectives and challenge the post-Cold War security order in Europe.
So a more assertive Russia emerged on the world stage.
Precisely. The annexation sent shockwaves through the international community, raising concerns about Russia's intentions and its willingness to violate international norms. It also emboldened other actors seeking to challenge the existing order.
Creating a ripple effect of instability.
Wow. The annexation of Crimea has had far-reaching consequences, both for the region and for the broader international system. It has contributed to the ongoing conflict in eastern Ukraine, heightened tensions between Russia and NATO, and fueled a new arms race in Europe.
And these tensions don't seem to be going away anytime soon.
Unfortunately, no. The annexation of Crimea remains a major point of contention between Russia and the West. It's unlikely that Russia will relinquish control of Crimea, and the West is unlikely to recognize the annexation.
So a stalemate of frozen conflict?
It has become a frozen conflict, yes, but one that could potentially thaw at any moment with dangerous consequences.
The annexation of Crimea serves as a reminder of the fragility of peace and the power of history and geopolitics.
It is a cautionary tale highlighting the importance of diplomacy, dialogue, and respect for international law. It also underscores the human cost of conflict and the need to pursue peaceful resolutions.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground today, exploring the annexation of Crimea from its historical roots to its geopolitical implications. It's been a fascinating journey into a complex and multifaceted issue.
We hope you found it informative and engaging. It provides a glimpse into the interconnectedness of our world and the enduring influence of the past.
If you're hungry for more thought-provoking content, be sure to subscribe to the Daniel David Allen YouTube channel. We release new episodes every week, exploring all sorts of captivating topics.
Until next time, stay curious and keep those minds engaged.
We'll see you in the next episode of RoboCast.
America has few economic interests in Ukraine. We recognize the deep and complex history between Russia and Ukraine. But we cannot stand by when the sovereignty and territorial integrity of a nation is flagrantly violated. If that happens without consequence in Ukraine, it could happen to any nation gathered here today.